Welcome everyone. Welcome to this webinar on enabling globally competitive and sustainable food production. Our presenters today are Jerry Doyle and Craig Katz. I'm Ian Reid. I'm the Chief Academic Officer here at ICEWARM and happy to be presenting today the webinar for the Australian Water School. Our participants today come from many countries, including Australia. So welcome to you all. It's great to have you all with us, and we're looking forward to working with you today. Before we get started, just a couple of points about things that are coming up from ICEWARM and from the Australian Water School. The Smart Water Summit is here in Adelaide next week. Unfortunately, it's all fully booked, so if you haven't got your registration in, you might be a little bit too late. So we're looking forward to a full house for the Water Summit here in Adelaide next week. And the list of webinars that are coming up in the near future between March and July this year. And don't forget also a number of courses coming up. The very popular HEPGRAD School Modelling course is being offered again. And the course Getting to Know Groundwater is coming up in association with the Electrical Centre for Groundwater Research and Training. So check our website for more details on that. The agenda today, we're having a 15-minute presentation from Jerry and Craig. And then, as I said, we really encourage you to ask questions, and it's open to all. We're recording this, and a link to the recording will be emailed to you so you can review and catch up on the things you may have missed. And other people who aren't able to get here today can also have a look at that. And straight after the webinar, we ask your feedback on a survey form, both on the screen and in your email. This really helps us. We really appreciate it. Take a minute or so just to fill in that survey. So our presenters today are Jerry and Craig, both with long experience in the water sector, from engineering and also from a food and beverage point of view. So we're really enjoying the opportunity to have Jerry and Craig present to us today. So without further ado, it's over to Jerry to kick us off. Thanks, Jerry.
Thanks, Ian. Today, Craig and I thought that we'd start by giving you a bit of an overview of the Northern Adelaide Irrigation Scheme project from our perspective, run you through a case study of the south of Spain where what we're talking about has been done and how it was done and how it impacted the community around that. And then Craig will run you through some of the more food-related aspects of, well, what is the demand in the market and where's it really coming from? So for Tonkin Consulting, this project started nearly 3 years ago, and it started with what is an idea that we could come up with to use water from the Bolivar wastewater treatment plant to drive economic development and jobs. And this was a really interesting opportunity for us to look at, well, what can water be used for to drive economic development and jobs? And how can you maximize that economic development and the jobs that are created? And what would a project look like around that? And so today I'm not going to talk to you about the Northern Adelaide Irrigation Scheme. I'm going to talk to you about a greenhouse development project that could have huge benefit to the state and could drive jobs and economic development. So the water project, I understand SA Water has already spoken on one of these webinars about, and it's something that there are others better placed to talk about it than me. The agricultural development side of things was, well, if you start looking at a project and looking for economic development with water as being a critical element of it, what are some of the things that you could do? And if you went to a scenario where you were looking at a loosened crop or an open field irrigation type scenario, wine, low-tech greenhouses or high-tech greenhouses, how much would it cost to set it up? What production capacity could you produce each year from that? What does that mean from a revenue perspective per hectare or per megalitre? And what the table in front of you at the moment shows is that by looking at a high-tech greenhouse solution, you can actually get very strong revenues, very strong yields with good jobs activity associated with it. So the economic possibilities are significant. So in looking at that and looking at how could we structure something around this, we worked initially collaboratively, and then the two projects started to separate and go their own way. And we were looking at it from the point of view of, well, what is the best way of getting this benefit? What is the best way of driving the growth and the jobs and the activity? And the high-tech greenhouse solution provides that benefit. Now, for a high-tech greenhouse solution to work, you need to have a market. And we'll talk more about the market, and Craig will do that because he's much more capable of doing that than I am. But we looked at it from the market, and where is the market to actually drive this revenue? What could you achieve? And the market is both domestic and overseas. And there is a growing demand for good quality food. And that food drives the economic development that flows off the back end of it. So at the moment, the Northern Adelaide Irrigation Scheme, the water side of things is moving ahead, and there are bits happening around that. And we continue to explore avenues to look at getting a high-tech greenhouse project off the ground. And Tonkins and Craig and the other parties involved in that project are very, very keen to see that come to fruition, because it's something that we see having huge benefit for the state. If you look at it from the point of view of just going out and being able to install a couple of hectares of greenhouses, you can generate jobs off the back of that. You can generate income that comes into the state that drives things forward. And if you can look at it as a way of changing the paradigm on how we do agriculture in Australia, so that we can be globally competitive in an industry that is growing, then it changes it even further. And to look at this as being something that could continue to grow and change the way we do agriculture is what we're looking at this project as. So I'll talk to you about an example of where this has been done and how they did it. So this picture in front of you is the south of Spain in the 1950s. And the guys we're dealing with from Spain tell the story of, apparently the Hollywood filmmakers used to take their spaghetti westerns out here because it was so barren and dry and deserted. And apparently The Good, the Bad and the Ugly, a movie I've never seen, was filmed here in the south of Spain. So as you can see from this, it's pretty dry and barren. And it's not the sort of place that you would think would be providing a large portion of the fresh fruit and vegetables of Europe. So what changed between 1950 and now that enabled that to happen? And if you look at the next slide that comes up, you'll see this area today is covered with greenhouses. And the image in the top right-hand corner of your screen is a Google Earth shot that you can zoom out a long way and you can still see all the greenhouses. In the 1950s, a group of farmers got together and formed a cooperative to start to look at how could they ensure that this part of Spain survived. What was it that they were going to do? And they took a proposal to the central government to build a pipeline to bring water into the region. And in taking that decision to bring water into the region, they instantly started to change the way they looked at water, the way they looked at what they could do. And they instantly put a value on water because they were paying for it. They knew how hard it was to come by, and they looked for every way they could to maximize what they got out of it. So a group of those farmers went over and looked at some of the technologies that were going on in Israel and the hydroponic systems associated with that, and they started to develop their own. They took the best of what they could find and they developed it further. And they kept pushing the boundaries on where it could be. And by placing that value on water from the beginning, they looked for every way to maximize it. Could they recirculate it around a number of times? What were the things that made it more useful to them or less useful to it? Where were they wasting? And how could they get the most value out of every drop? And it got to the point where in the high-tech greenhouses that we're talking about for a project in Northern Adelaide, water is no longer a hugely important input. It's an important input, but it's not the most central. What are some of the things that you can do to try and drive that and bring that bring that around? Well, it is about placing a value on water. It is about looking at water as a valuable asset and what can you do with it. But it's also about opening the mind. This is talking about 23,000 hectares of greenhouse. That is substantially more than anyone is envisaging happening in South Australia at this point in time. There are growers there who are producing lettuce, tomatoes, cucumbers that are going throughout Europe. This has become a bit of a hub for taking things around. And 60, 70 years ago, they were all being told, you can't do this. It's not going to work. It's all a pipe dream. It's not. By continuing to evolve and grow, they've been able to make it a reality. I'll hand over to Craig now, and he'll talk a little bit more about, well, what is the opportunity in agriculture?
Thanks, Jerry. As Jerry was saying, this whole project has been driven by demand. And as you're probably aware, a lot of people are talking about that the demand is going to double by 2050 because of population growth, etc. I've only been in Australia a few years, and I got into export, international trade, because of the geographic location in Australia, being so close to Asia, which has such a vast majority of the world's population, which are increasing in terms of status, in terms of buying power, but also because of the lack of Australian product that sits on the shelves throughout Asia. We have the wine guys who have done a fantastic job in building the brand and going out and putting their product on the shelves, but in terms of other products, very limited. You take that right back down to horticulture, which is fresh fruit and veg, and these are the type of products that people are starting to look for and demand from Australia because of our quality assurance standards, because of our clean air, because of our approach, etc., etc. So demand for these type of products is certainly on the increase, probably more so than what we can actually produce at the moment. So tying that back to the Spanish example that Jerry was mentioning earlier, they grew because of the demand throughout Europe for their product. And that's really the opportunity that we see in pursuing and going ahead with this particular venture. Australia has been known as a producer for beef, lamb, cereal crops, and only recently really starting to take the lead in terms of horticultural production. But because of the location of Australia, because of the different weather issues and droughts and floods, etc., etc., the consistency of supply has been a real hindrance. And Jerry will tell you, and others will tell you, that I have a mantra in terms of what buyers are looking for throughout Asia and domestic. It's consistency of supply, consistency of quality at a consistent price. The way that the markets work here is that price fluctuates on a weekly basis, and therefore it becomes really hard to have long-term contracts with buyers overseas and domestically. The project that we're embarking upon addresses all of those factors. So you get a consistent supply and a consistent quality because you reduce down potential disease, pests, obviously protecting against the weather and climate, and you can set a price, which is what people are looking for. We're almost moving towards an agricultural utility approach to this whole thing. So reducing down the cost of produce and making it more available to more people is the ultimate goal of this. As it says there in the final slide, that there's a lot of, you would have heard about the Dutch technology, producing stuff out of glass houses, and being that consistent. So we have a number of players around the world that are starting to develop these type of technologies. There's a lot of money being pumped into agricultural technology and how to increase yields out of crops and so on and so forth. So Australia has a real opportunity in terms of supplying globally, and I don't use that lightly, supplying globally, not becoming the food bowl that everyone keeps talking about, becoming more the gourmet section, if you like. But in order to do that, we really have to change the fundamental way that we're actually producing stuff and moving towards that more intensive production side of things. With that comes research and development, comes new ways to finance these type of things. You know, financing in the agricultural sector is a very small portion of all investments globally. But what we're seeing in the last few years is there's more and more money being pumped into agriculture, increasing productivity, new technologies, new pest-resistant approaches, etc., because people realize, investors are starting to realize that the demand for food is increasing exponentially, and Australia has a very key role to play in all of that. Linked with that is, as I said previously, the sorry, I'm just trying. It's gone back. Consumers internationally are looking for safe produce, nutritious and tasty produce. I've traveled and done a lot of work in UAE, for argument's sake, and they're still buying apples from China. Now, apples from China are very cheap, but there's no nutritional value in them whatsoever. And when consumers start to hear about how apples are produced and the sort of process that they go through, they are put off Chinese apples. That's the role that Australia needs to play in terms of educating Asia in particular, because they're our geographic neighbors, in terms of nutrition, the taste, and everything else that goes into it. We are expensive globally at the moment, but we shouldn't shy away from that. We're expensive because of the quality and care that we take in producing our produce, but we have an opportunity to reduce down those costs and become a lot more globally competitive. So that's pretty much, I mean, sorry, I'm having problems with the PowerPoint. But that's pretty much the opportunity that we see, and that's the project that we're embarking upon, is to fundamentally change the approach that we have in terms of horticultural production, moving more to that utility scale technology infrastructure side of things. No doubt there'll be some questions, so I'll pass back to Ian. Thank you.
Thanks, Craig and Jerry. They're very interesting presentations. We have some questions already, but please feel free. There's still time for more questions as we go forward. So first, to Kane, sort of a question from Adelaide. Did Spain have a good sense of where their demand was before they invested in establishing greenhouses? And who made that initial investment?
I'll jump in and start, and Craig might be able to add to what I say. Did they have a good sense of where their demand was before they invested? At the time they invested, their demand was local. We were talking about Spanish demand. Did they have a great sense for what it was? No. They knew that they needed to supply food for their own people in Spain. Who made the initial investment? The initial investment was largely made by the government through loans and support provided to the investors, to the farmers. So the government drove that initial, and then as the private sector grew stronger and were able to do it, they continued it going.
Yep. Great. Thank you for that. Now, a question from Andy from WA. He says, I've only started to scratch the surface of research in greenhouses in Almeria, Spain. It says to me that any discussion of this region should include discussion of the social impacts. What do you think about that?
What do you mean, Andy?
So I guess not just the financial benefits, but any broader cultural or social impacts. I guess you talked about it.
Yeah, look, the social impacts that we saw were that there's a population down there. There are jobs for people down there. Now, both Craig and I have been to that part of Spain and have met with people that were part of it and had conversations with them. And the real key thing was that there's a future for people in that part of Spain. Without that, there was no industry. There'd be tourism on the coast, and that would be about it.
Yep.
So,
and that's really the opportunity. Sorry, Jay. That's really the opportunity that we see for the Northern Adelaide Plains, in that by setting up an industry there that continues to grow and develop, it'll attract more families out north, and obviously we'll have some other workers that come in from overseas, but give them an opportunity to have a place where they can put roots down for their family and develop and grow. Now, our partner in Spain, they've set up a number of different initiatives to work with their staff. from working with the mothers there, setting up creches and that type of thing, and really becomes a whole community. And that's really the opportunity that we see for out north.
Great, thank you for that. Now, a question from Sherry in Melbourne. Why is there more money being invested into agriculture in Australia? Is there also a lot of investment in reducing and managing food waste as well? So if we produce more, is there more waste? Is that an issue?
If we look at current farming practices, then yes, there is a large percentage of waste, and there have been some fantastic initiatives such as Food Bank, where a lot of that, not waste as such, but second category product gets put into various communities. There hasn't been enough, in my opinion, research and development done in terms of value-adding product. Looking at the juice industry as an example, compared that to the rest of the world. With the intensive horticulture production facility that we're looking at, wastage is very, very minimal because everything is so controlled. So that's another reason for looking and moving forward with this type of approach to production.
Great, thanks. Now, a question from Pete from here in Adelaide. What are the critical issues in securing finance for this alternative approach to infrastructure development and the new business model?
a really topical question for Craig and I at the moment. What are the key issues? The key issues are that this is something that Australian investors haven't seen before. And yes, we can point to Spain and we can point to other parts of the world where similar things have been done, but it hasn't been done in Australia. And so the questions are about making sure the technology is appropriate and works and all of those sorts of things. And then once people get comfortable with that, the next round of questions becomes about the market and where is the market and how can we do that. And then the next round of questions becomes about, well, why do it in South Australia? Why not do it closer to the market? Why not do it in Vietnam? And you get those sorts of questions. And it seems to be that you move through that type of process. And how does that flow on? Well, at the moment we're sitting here, and the reason we're a little bit coy about talking too much about the actual project is because it isn't actually a project at this point in time. It's still an idea. We haven't got funding to do it.
And that's about all leading edge things like that, aren't they? I guess your answer also picks up a question from Jared here in Adelaide too. He talks about the industrial scale of the greenhouse operations, one thing, but there are also things like transport costs and cool houses and the value chain that might be difficult to meet in terms of making the operation work.
Oh, look, it is. They are things that are complications, but there are also things where the opportunity, the brand of Australia, the brand of South Australia is so strong that they're not obstacles to overcoming. One of the things that we've discovered in working through this is the economies associated with this are actually such that it's pretty strong, even with the fact that, to get things into locations in Asia or the Middle East is going to require air freight.
Yeah.
But in saying that, Adelaide, especially over the last few years, has seen a number of international carriers come here. We do cover the main markets if we use Singapore and Hong Kong as hubs to these other areas, UAE through Emirates. So yes, the supply chain is a key consideration in all of this, but we're not that far behind where we need to be in terms of logistics.
Another question about sort of sustainability issues, I guess, from Martin in Frankston, says, where would the Adelaide skiers source their water from and how sustainable is that water source? Is recycled water considered a viable source for greenhouses?
Sure.
The answer to this.
Yeah. So the answer to this is the project that we're talking about would source its water from the Northern Adelaide Irrigation Scheme, which takes its water from the Bolivar Wastewater Treatment Plant. We are talking about tertiary treated wastewater that is desalinated, and the value associated with the water is quite strong, that it is something that it works through. Is recycled water suitable, treated to the parameters that the greenhouse demands? Yes.
Right, thank you. Also, Graham from Adelaide asks, what are the principal research and development needs to make projects like this happen?
In terms of research and development for the project that we're looking at the moment, that fortunately has been done by our partner in Spain. They've gone through the last 50 years of enhancing the technology, looking at different substrates, et cetera, So they've done a lot of the work themselves. In terms of research and development that's needed from Australia, the value-add products, the different approaches to packaging, different approaches to the market and how to market those products. That's the research and development that is still kind of missing, so to speak.
Thank you. Now, an interesting question from Sherry asks, why is there no nutritional value in Chinese apples?
I don't want to put all your viewers off. The way that they grow a lot of their produce in China is very different. And if you just take simple things, the air quality, the water quality, the soil quality that they have in China, because of the pollution that's there, all of that gets sucked up into the fruit or into the product itself. So nutrients are not as rich as the produce that we produce here in Australia. That's not, that's the cleanest way I'm going to describe it as to how to use stuff.
Fair enough. Also, a question about the difference between low-tech and high-tech greenhouses, how you define those.
So a low-tech greenhouse provides pest control. A high-tech greenhouse provides climate control, recirculates water, maximizes the area that's available for use of the greenhouse, is highly efficient, and becomes much more like a factory rather than an open field.
Great. Yeah, that's clear. Look, thanks to Andy for a follow-up question. He's followed up with a link. Andy, we'll publish that link on the website once we're done here. But also, you've asked a question that about the Sundrop farm in Port Augusta, which is under development, and could something like be done elsewhere? Is it currently viewed as a success story in South Australia?
I think the Sundrop farm in Port Augusta project has been a success. It uses a Danish technology greenhouse that they've managed to be able to make work. The differences between it and the Spanish is about the capital outlay that's involved and some of the suitability for various different climate conditions. But there's nothing wrong with the technology that they've used, and I think that the project has been successful. They've got a long-term contract to sell tomatoes domestically.
And it works, yeah.
It works.
And so another detailed question from John asks, what's the critical size area for greenhouses to achieve the best efficiencies?
To achieve the efficiencies, it isn't so much dictated by the size. You can achieve the high efficiencies by having a 1 hectare greenhouse or by having 100 hectares of greenhouses. The critical factor in determining the size is based on your ability to fulfill Craig's mantra of a consistent supply, consistent quality at a consistent price. And so if you've got that part of it right and you're able to continue to meet your demand, that determines the size rather than the other way around.
Yeah, great. Malit asked a question, wouldn't an idea such as this be appropriate for funding by AusAid, which is actually employed DFAT now, and the location of the project close to the market where the demand is? So it could be given as aid for developing countries.
Yeah, it could if you wanted to do it as an aid-based project, but if you're looking for economic development, providing produce as aid isn't going to achieve that goal.
Yeah, it's all about what you're trying to achieve, isn't it?
Yep, yeah, it is.
Peter has asked a question, what about the availability of the engineering and agronomic and horticultural skills and experience in you? This seems to be an issue in some of the earlier comments, but perhaps some of the vertical supply chain integration experiences in some of the more intensive field production systems such as Costas and Medrano might offer some pointers for you.
Yeah, look, I'm not actually overly concerned about the ability of Australia to meet the engineering or the agricultural knowledge that's required. Yes, there will be the need to be trained in the specific system and how that works, but that's the same as anything. So I'm not concerned about that. I think some of the bigger issues around labour are more around the unskilled labour and people's willingness to do that as a job.
Right. Yeah.
So
Always an issue. Yeah.
it is.
And Graham's asked another question too. Perhaps is a mixture of low-tech and high-tech greenhouses more attractive from an investment point of view? Is it not a risk investment?
Not really. The reason I say not really is because the low-tech alternative has a lot of the capital cost associated with the high-tech, but without the increased production value that goes along with it. So if you're gonna go that far and invest in the greenhouse, you might as well go the whole way and do it as high-tech.
Great. Look, that's terrific. I've just got one final question myself, actually. It struck me that a lot of your work is internationally based. Some of the ideas come from international exposure. And a point that Craig made was quite striking, that this is actually all about knowledge and how you view the world. Is more so than the actual technology itself. How important do you think that international exposure is to learn about Spain and Israel and other countries, what they're doing in developing good ideas?
We can learn from everybody. The Israelis 50, 60 years ago came up with hydroponic technology, not in its current format. South America is making leaps and bounds in terms of different root crops. All around the world, there's different innovations, and it's so important for us to learn from, and people around the world are learning from Australians as well in terms of how to get the best out of such a dry climate, and so on and so forth. So we've got a lot of knowledge that we can actually export as well. But to look at where we are in an agriculture producing country, and looking at the market, which is right on our doorstep, understanding the issues that they face in terms of their production capabilities, in terms of their demand of the consumers for nutritious, tasty, fresh produce, and why they can't actually meet that particular thing. It's not just about looking for innovation, it's also looking for opportunities, and how do we fulfill that? And that's really what this project is about.
Great. Yeah, I agree. That's really interesting. Look, a couple of more detailed questions about the greenhouses and operation, if that's okay. Mm-hmm. From an anonymous question, how would these high-tech greenhouses need more artificially fertilising additives, perhaps, than traditional techniques? Can you still use organic farming methods with the high-tech greenhouses?
So Craig is probably going to have to answer the organic part of it, because I can't describe what meat's organic and what doesn't. High-tech greenhouses grow produce hydroponically. And so in growing it hydroponically, you are providing the nutrients that a plant needs through the water supply into it.
Yeah, it's not a soil-based substrate. And at the moment, industry doesn't recognize hydroponic as being organic. I know a few people who grow stuff hydroponically have been trying to get the organic status, but the reality is for Australian consumers, organic, yes, it's important, but coming from a hydroponic sense, that you are getting that same thing. You're not affected by pests and disease so much because everything is in a lot more controlled environment. For other parts of the world where they insist on organic status, it's because some of the countries that supply them, they're trying to get a better level of quality of produce, and they think that going organic is the way to go. For us, exporting organic is very difficult. Without using certain sprays, etc., the produce just does not last when it travels under organic.
But yeah, that's the reality. Yeah. Thank you. Another question from Andy now. He says that in your first slide, the water consumption for low-tech greenhouses and high-tech greenhouses were, from the memory, I think mine too, about 8 to 10 megalitres per hectare per year. We've recently had a consultant advise us that the water consumption in our area of southwestern Western Australia is going to be more like 20 megalitres per hectare per year. Do you have any comments on that?
The specifics of it are going to be dictated by what you're trying to grow, how you're trying to grow it, what recirculation you're able to get, all of those sorts of things. So I probably can't comment on the specifics of it because, again, the numbers we put up are generic, they're averages, all of those sorts of things, because it's all variable based on a whole lot of factors in there.
Great. A question now for another Western Australian from Heather. She asked, what place would automation have in your high-tech greenhouses? Would this reduce the need for unskilled labour?
It would, yes. Automation plays a big role. And in the Spanish technology that we're looking at, automation within the greenhouses is huge. It doesn't completely negate the need for some labour, but it significantly reduces the amount of labour that is needed.
Right.
What we found with the Spanish partner, although they've put in automation, which cuts down the need for low-skilled labour, was they were still taking that labour component and upskilling them, teaching them different parts of the business, of the system, of the operation. So you're actually upskilling your workforce as a result of automation, if that makes sense.
Understand, yeah, so it's a progression in a sense.
Yeah.
Now a question from an anonymous questioner. There's been some debate about the nutritional content of hydroponic food. Any comments on that versus soil-based crops?
As Jerry said before, each plant has its own nutrient makeup of what it requires to grow, to get nutrition within its plant itself. Everyone has, in soil-based, it's difficult. I mean, Tripod, which is a lettuce grower, they use chicken manure as an example. In South Australia, we don't use chicken manure. They had salmonella a couple of years ago. So everyone's still learning. But the technology that we've chosen is specifically around the nutrients to go per product that we're actually going to be growing. So it's all dictated on that sense. So it reduces the amount of pests and disease that can come up in soil.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much, Jerry and Craig. That's all our questions for now. Do you have anything else you want to add just before we finish off?
Not for me.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, gentlemen, for that very interesting presentation today, and thank you also to the questioners. Before we finish off, just a quick reminder that you will get a feedback form when you close off here. We've rated your feedback. The recording link will be emailed to you. More webinars to come. If you've enjoyed this, tell your friends, and we hope to see you again soon as well. And also on our website with information on future courses coming up. So thank you very much, and see you next time.